Hello, everybody, and welcome to the first Chesapeake Voices of STEM chat. I am very pleased to have these great professionals, representatives of the energy industry from the Department of Energy, Office of Energy Efficiency and Renewable Energy. They're going to talk a little bit today to us about careers in STEM as it relates to energy, especially on the national level. I'm personally excited by this because I know that we are at a point of history where we need more energy than we have ever needed before to become the culture and the society we say we want to be. At the same time, it needs to be cleaner and more sustainable than it ever has been. And so we know we have generations worth of work ahead of us and careers that professionals can adopt that would really have a high impact on the quality of life for people globally, not just in the country. So I want to thank everybody for joining us today. We know that our theme for this season in the both first technical challenge and first robotic competition is around power generation. Over on the first tech challenge, we have power play presented by Raytheon Technologies, and on the first robotic competition, we have charged up presented by Haas. So energy generation, energy storage, energy networks, that's at top of mind for all of our teams today. So welcome everybody. It's fantastic to have you here. I'd love to start out and ask you if you could just introduce yourself and a little bit about what got you in your pathway to a STEM career, and maybe something unexpected you encountered along the way that really contributed to your career as you moved along. And I'm just going to go clockwise as it appears on my screen. So Neha, if you can introduce yourself and talk a little bit about your pathway first.
Sure. So I work in the Department of Energy's Hydrogen and Fuel Cell Technologies Office. So we fund research to make hydrogen gas from clean sources like water. So splitting water using renewable electricity as an example, and then using the hydrogen in places where you otherwise would have used fossil fuels. So, for example, using hydrogen to power a truck instead of using diesel, using hydrogen to make steel instead of using coal, and other extensions like that. So I became interested in this space largely in middle slash high school. So it started with like a science class where we learned about global warming, and that was, I think, the initial area of interest. And then when I was in high school, I just also happened to start learning a lot more about like geopolitics of energy and how it influences more than aside from environmental things, but just also influences other political decisions. And at the time, I was trying to kind of decide whether I wanted to get into a career that was more policy focused or something that was more technical. And I didn't really know. And so I decided to go down a technical route mainly because I thought it left more options open. And I kind of stumbled into where I am now. So my first job was actually working at a coal power plant, which I think is always kind of interesting because I sort of went full circle. And I kind of did that to get boots on the ground type experience in a technical field, and it was really interesting. I think a lot of times perceptions can be really different from reality, so it was interesting to just meet people who worked in that environment and see how the plant actually functions and how much can go into making it clean. And then I went to grad school, and I guess maybe the one theme from my set of career experiences was that I often tried to be very proactive in trying to find opportunities. And this was just something that kind of fortunately I got drilled into us in high school just with one of the classes I took. So our high school teacher always used to encourage us to apply for internships and reach out to people. When you apply to an internship, reach out to somebody to let them know you applied and show that you're interested. And surprisingly, that can make a huge difference. So I basically cold emailed a whole bunch of people in grad school saying, I'd love to work for you, blah, like, super interested in your work, da, da, da. And one of them happened to really need a grad student because they had just stumbled upon funding to hire a grad student. And so even though I didn't have any background in that space, they kind of brought me on because they just needed somebody right away. And that position was in the field of hydrogen. So that's how I built a background in hydrogen. And then those folks basically later connected me to a fellowship at DOE, which kind of evolved into a permanent position. And that's how I ended up here.
That's wonderful. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. Mariana, I would like to ask you a similar question. What was your pathway into STEM, and what unexpected things did you encounter along the way that really enhanced your ability to get into this as a career?
Absolutely. So I am a fellow with the Building Technologies Office within the U.S. Department of Energy. Like Neha, I also stumbled into this position. So my background is actually in climate activism, organizing, and sustainability education. So when I was in undergrad and college, My university really encouraged us to intern every day, like every semester, every summer, every winter. I was here in DC, so that just comes with the culture of the city. And I joined organizations like Environment America and the Wilderness Society. My priority was conservation. I have a very deep love for nature and animals. I was born and raised in Puerto Rico, where I had direct contact with the oceans and the wilderness, and that really inspired my passion for climate change and climate action. And while I was at American University, I was a sustainability educator with the American University Office of Sustainability, where I reached out to students and talked to them about what the university's carbon neutrality goal meant. I talked about our solar panels. I talked about our LEED certified buildings. I talked about our waste management and water conservation policies, for example. And I became really good friends with my boss. And one day I met her out for coffee. And she said, you know, there are really great fellowships with the Department of Energy. We have a lot of scientists on board, but we really need someone that can talk to people and just talk, 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 talk. So that was me. And I interviewed. I went through a pretty rigorous interview round, and there I was. I was a fellow with an undergrad degree, the youngest fellow that I saw in an ocean of PhDs. So it's been a really wild ride, and I'm now on my third year of the fellowship.
That's great. That's a great story. Thank you so much for sharing it. And Melissa, can you talk a little bit about your pathway into STEM, your career at DoD, your pathway into STEM, and what surprising things did you find along the way that really enhanced your career?
Yeah, so thank you for having me here. This is a very exciting opportunity for me. I really enjoy this type of connection with the students. My name is Marisa Morales Rodriguez, and just like Mariana, I am from Puerto Rico as well. Right now, I'm a technology manager contractor for the Solar Energy Technologies Office, and there I manage a portfolio of projects of a variety of topics like solar forecasting, power electronics, sensors and monitoring, cybersecurity. I'm the lead person for the cybersecurity portfolio in the office. My path in STEM was unexpected. In my house, nobody is a scientist, just me. And I this is something science was something that I never saw growing up other than in TV, right? And but I was always so curious about things like how things mix well or how things get frozen in the freezer and stuff like that. And I found myself, now that I think back, doing these type of little experiments when I was a kid. So when I was in high school, trying to make a decision on what I was going to do, I was like, I don't know what I'm going to do. So I started in a natural sciences program, and then I got my bachelor's and master's degree in physical chemistry from the University of Puerto Rico because I wanted to be a cosmetic chemist at the time. And then I got something that we all have in common here is internships and seek opportunities, right? So I didn't get to do what I originally planned, but then later on I got these internships at ORNL, Oak Ridge National Laboratory, and that exposed me to so many other fields. So then it was time to pick, what are you going to do, right? So I tried to stick with things that I did in grad school, which was like microelectromechanics, material sciences, and sensor development. And then one day, my program manager at the time, said, I need you to make this measurement for this substation transformer. And I'm like, what is that? I don't know, because I've done other projects developing different sensors for climate change applications, for explosive detections, but I've never worked with anything related to the grid. And then here I am. They bring me the piece of device that I needed to take a measurement of, and I did it. And then I started learning why this is important, why transformers are important, why dissolved gas analysis is important inside of transformer. And that's how I fell in love with energy. And I went and I got my PhD in energy science and engineering from the University of Tennessee. I spent about 10 years at ORNL working on different various projects. And for the last 6 years I was there, I worked under the Sustainable Electricity Program. And I worked in projects with sensors. I try to stick to that line. And then I migrated into communications and then later on into cybersecurity. So it's just such a multidisciplinary field. And you really, I mean, I think there's some commonality here in this conversation, that you really don't know exactly where the path is going to take you, but you're going to get there. And also, as Neha mentioned, and Mariana as well, I did internships. I connected with people who were in universities, who were in different DOE offices, different DOD offices, different other government agencies when I was in early stages of my bachelor's degree. And then I started making connections, and I started learning more about, you know, what the workforce will look like for me and what things I could do, what did I like and not like. And that was very a very good choice, right, or path to take to actually understand what opportunities are available.
Yeah, that's wonderful. I hear you all saying this. I hear all this combination of a deep interest and deep talent in science or policy, but also leveraging the network of other people who are deeply committed to outcomes in science. I hear that as a deep part of your careers. That's interesting. So I'd love to start. First question with Neha. I would love to. So you work on hydrogen fuel cells and hydrogen as a power source. Now that's very different from what we hear typically around solar energy or wind energy, other renewables. So could you talk a little bit about the current landscape of hydrogen fuel cells in the energy industry and how they compare to other clean energy technologies?
Yeah. So hydrogen is mainly something that's of interest in sectors that are hard to decarbonize with more traditional solutions. So things like solar energy, wind energy, nuclear energy, those are all ways of making the electricity. But then you need a way of getting the electricity, you know, to a customer. So for example, in the case of your vehicle, commonly the way that you would decarbonize your car would be, for example, to take out the gasoline engine and put a battery on it, and then the battery is powered by the solar energy, the wind energy, the nuclear, but the R&D on the car specifically would be on the battery. So for example, we have an office within DOE, the Vehicle Technologies Office, that funds lots of research on batteries. Hydrogen is for sectors where, as an example, deploying a battery would be difficult to do, or directly connecting to an electricity grid would be difficult to do. So examples would include really long haul heavy duty trucks. So like trucks that have to be able to go 750 miles that carry goods, you know, coast to coast across the country. So they have to be able to handle a lot more weight than a traditional passenger vehicle. Those are hard to electrify because just the size of the battery would be so high that you would barely be able to carry any cargo back and forth. So that's one space where we've been focusing hydrogen technology. You know, other places include things like, for example, making chemicals. So there are certain chemicals that use hydrogen today, but today that hydrogen is made from natural gas, which is not a clean process. So one of our focus areas is taking places where you would typically use hydrogen from natural gas and replacing that hydrogen with clean hydrogen that's made from water. So displacing basically current uses with hydrogen that's cleaner. So those are basically the broad focus areas of the office.
And is it more appropriate to think of hydrogen as an energy storage technology or an energy generation technology? Like,
yeah, so typically people refer to it as an energy carrier because it's like you're making the hydrogen from some primary source. So you'd make the hydrogen, let's say, by splitting water using solar electricity, or by splitting water using nuclear or geothermal, whatever. And then you would store the hydrogen somewhere and then use it when you need it. So you might use the hydrogen to make ammonia or to make methanol. You might use it to produce power. You could burn the hydrogen, or you could use it with something called a fuel cell to produce electricity that powers a building or a vehicle, or, you know, any other end use. But the types of things you can use it for once you've made it are fairly diverse. And the way to make it is basically by capturing some primary energy source with water.
great. And just another follow up, like a career pathway in that. Is that like chemists? Are you looking at physicists? What's the kind of career pathway to hydrogen fuel cell based energy generation?
I would say, very broadly speaking, material science, I think, is a really a field where there is a need across probably all the DOE offices. That's become a really priority space. So within material science, there's a lot. Material science is basically studying like how different materials interact with hydrogen and what causes them to fail, what conditions do they fail in, how do you measure that failure. So that's of interest across the full spectrum, like whether you're making a catalyst or you're making a pipeline. So my research was in hydrogen pipelines, which was super niche, like how does steel interact with hydrogen as an example. And there's other examples too, how do like dispenser hoses interact with hydrogen, all kinds of really specific things. But generally speaking, I would say I think it's good to focus on like find a thing, anything, and kind of focus on that. So for me, like when I was earlier in my career, like in college, I was all over the place. Like I had interests like pretty much all over the place. And I think that wasn't really that productive. But I think if you pick a thing and just try to kind of become good at that thing, whatever it is, it could be mechanical engineering, it could be material science, it could be energy policy, it could be environmental science, then there's usually a demand for expertise in some specific thing. I think a lot of times, like we all feel like we need to become an expert in everything, and that can lead you almost nowhere. But like hydrogen pipelines was a really niche thing for me to study in grad school, and it didn't immediately result in anything. But eventually, when there was a position where they needed someone who knew about hydrogen pipelines, there's hardly anyone that has expertise in that topic because it's so niche. So just having like some sort of expertise in a particular space, I think, is a good way to go.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. Mariana, so for you, so policy, energy policy, everything is policy, policy, policy. Maybe I've spent too much time around DC, but it has such an impact on our ability to grow industries, to develop new professionals. So what advice do you have for students looking to make a career in clean energy policy, and what unexpected skills might they need? And I'm going to preface that by saying I know at least 5 team members that I've talked to in the last 2 months that specifically called out environmental or energy policy as their chosen career path. So I know there's a deep interest here. So could you give us a little advice on making that career?
Absolutely. First, I'll start off with communication. It's really important to practice your public speaking. And when I was at American University, being a sustainability educator, talking about exciting things like solar, but also things like waste and recycling and composting, I really, gained a lot of confidence. And I was talking to rooms of up to 200 students at a time. Some of them wanted to be there. Some of them didn't and had to. So it was like a real mixed bag of an audience. So that really allowed me to kind of get on the phone and talk to really big companies, which is what I do right now in my position as a fellow. I work on a public-private partnership called Better Buildings, where we work with market leaders to advance the adoption of energy efficient technologies and low carbon technologies. So I'm talking to hospitals, I'm talking to Kaiser Permanente, I'm talking to the Mayo Clinic, I'm talking to Cleveland Clinic. And I'm not an engineer, but I know the engineers and I can get them on the call and we can all have a big brainstorming together. So that's really what I do, and that's the key skill that's gotten me where I am today. In addition to that, relationship building, different than communication, but similar. Making friends along the way as you move out through your career journey. Not everything is a competition. You'll encounter people that will see it that way, but making friends can go a really, really, really long way. In addition to all of this, a few other niche areas that I want to share with folks. Understanding the implications of energy equity and environmental justice when we're talking about the clean energy transition. And I'll let you know why. Right? Let's say that we're starting, a solar project in a specific area. It's pretty simple. It's an easy puzzle. Let's build it. Let's get it connected. It's done. But when you bring in the communities that live there, when you bring in the workforce, that puzzle, that problem becomes harder to solve. And not a lot of people have the expertise to engage with those communities, conduct a proper stakeholder engagement process, for example, and understand, the needs and how to execute a project like that properly. And most of all, how to make sure that communities get ownership of projects like that and can benefit from it. So it's another dimension to the climate question, to the energy question. And that's not something that you are necessarily taught when you're going to get an engineering degree, for example. So you need to be intentional in seeking that out. And if you're unable to do that, getting mentors that have, expertise in that space is also, a really great way to learn, or, just pick up a good book. In addition to that, labor policy. There's a resurgence of labor unions and a very strong labor movement right now. And, the climate transition won't happen on its own. We need people to do the work. So understanding those implications is important as well.
That's great. And can you talk a little bit quickly about public-private partnerships? I don't think that that gets enough light, right? So, what are the advantages of that specific approach? What are we able to achieve with that? Well, like, first of all, what is it for the people watching, and what are the advantages of that sort of partnership over a purely governmental or a purely private approach?
Yeah, when people think about public-private partnerships, they usually think about contractual agreements. But Better Buildings is a voluntary program. So the companies approach federal agencies to kind of like seek help. And in that same vein, collaborate and, share information, share insight on their boots on the ground experience as they're moving towards, a journey to reach a net zero carbon goal, an energy efficiency goal, for example. Right. So through Better Buildings, we talk to market leaders, right? I mentioned the hospitality space, but if you think about other big brand names, I can think of Walgreens, I can think of Whole Foods, I can think of, other really big companies. And when we share, technology pathways with them and they struggle to implement them, they come back to us and they give us the feedback. Where are the gaps? Where are there, a need for resources that's going to help you, stand up an on-site solar project more easily, or, move forward with, phasing out natural gas, which is super hard to do in specific regions, or include, emerging technologies like cold climate heat pumps, right? So it's kind of like a feedback loop. And that's why they're, really, really valuable. That's
Great.
my piece. Another
Okay.
example of a public-private partnership would be the EPA Energy Star program. So I'll just mention that so folks can do research and find out more.
Google it. Yeah, it's a great. I think it's one of the best like kind of ways to walk forward actionable
Hmm.
energy policy in the last 50 years, probably. So thank you very much for that. So Marissa, on your end, so what I love about this group is it really combines, private entities, interaction with private entities. Obviously, DOE is a federal entity, but also academic, right? Our friends at the academy and that research
Hmm.
component of it. So working as strongly as you do in energy research as a PhD and in the experimental environment like Oak Ridge National Laboratory. And I would encourage everybody on the call to Google Oak Ridge if you're not familiar with it. They've done some amazing research there. What do you think are some of the most important things we need to do to bring promising energy technologies out of the lab and to get them deployed in the real world? We've heard so much about advancements in the energy sector, but I think we're looking at what looks like a similar energy grid to the last 20 years. So what are the things we can do to bring out of the lab and into the real world?
So these are great follow-on to the conversation on public-private partnerships. Before I dive into the question, yeah, the Department of Energy National Labs, there's a ton of different internships that students can apply to and then get that sense of what the research world will look like. So I encourage you to take a look at those as well. There are different mechanisms, and we will be happy to share information if anyone is interested. Yeah, so working at one of the national laboratories, so they focus on cutting edge technology, advancing the state of the art, and doing some proof of concept. And what that means is that technology will take some time to be seen deployed in the field. However, there's some projects where we call applied engineering or applied science that develop technologies in collaboration with industry. And then those technologies may be more mature and they are ready for demonstration phase. And they will then go through a period of validation in the field. And so doing more of industry-led in partnership with government will allow to bring promising energy technologies from the lab to the real world. And we do some of that at CETO, at the Solar Energy Technologies Office. And so there are so many funding opportunities. Some of them were mentioned here for organizations to apply to get these technologies tested in the field and ready for adoption. And this is part of our job, right? This is part of one of our missions to get these technologies, to get them mature and to get them deployed, to get them adopted by industry, get them commercially available, and then making enabling this clean energy technology transition. And that's part of my core job functions. Oversee some of these projects that are currently on the demonstration phase, and we have strong industry partners that are participating in coordination with utilities, and then partnerships with national labs as well, because the expertise there is enormous. And that's more of that collaboration with industry is what's going to make it happen in the end.
What do you think are sort of the key things that help industry adoption? Because tech adoption is one of the big challenges for the National Science Foundation or any research institution, like that conversion. So what do you think are the key either elements of the policy elements, elements that businesses can take? What do you think are the key things that bring a new technology from the lab itself to be able to be commercialized or brought into business and brought into the public? What are the key things that need to happen?
So that's a long road, right? And it needs to be something that is needed and that add value to and that bridge a gap, right? That doesn't exist right now, that exists right now, and there's a need for it, right? It's immediate need. And for industry, of course, they are focused on sometimes, there's like, what's the market value of this technology, right? And revenue, and that's a different kind of line of thinking. But with some of the industry partners that we work on, they're really interested in developing some of these enabling technologies and getting some of the faster integration, safer integration into the renewable systems, into the grid, and making enough, advancing technology enough so we can have a reliable and secure, clean power system. And so it needs to be a good need for this technology, and it needs to bridge a technical gap in order to then be able to then be in get it like some sort of fast track into adoption.
That's great.
So there has to be some innovation, right? And solving a problem. That's very important.
That's great. Yeah, especially I know people wanting to go into industry right away or startups. That's solving a problem. Are you actually solving a problem, or you're just doing something you want to do? Those are the differentiators. So thank you for that. I appreciate it.
Yeah.
Neha, on your end, this is also on the research piece of it. Decarbonization. That's something we hear about frequently. We have too much carbon in the environment. That's the thing at the top of people's mind. Although I know that that's a multi-tiered problem. There's a lot of factors that go into climate change and other things like that. But we're looking at decarbonization as one of the chief ways we can help sort of manage that problem. So could you talk about what do you feel are the most promising types of research and development when it comes to decarbonization technologies that are likely to impact the world in 10 years, not 100, but in the next decade? What do you think are the most promising decarbonization, either techniques or research or technologies that are coming forward?
So I think there's a combination of things. So one space where I think this is not an R&D space, but I guess part of the role of government is to make sure that we're implementing policy in an appropriate way. So, for example, the Department of Energy is supporting the Department of Treasury in implementing tax credits that got put in place through the Inflation Reduction Act. And some of these tax credits are historic in that they were never in place before. So, for example, there's a new tax credit to make clean hydrogen, that this is the first time it's ever been created. There's large continued tax credits for wind, solar, batteries, new credits for vehicles. And any type of policy like that can be implemented effectively or not, depending on what type of rules you put in place, what type of verification you put in place, what you do and don't allow. So without getting into, too much, going for too far down the rabbit hole, basically, I think those policies can or be effective or can end up being a bit of a waste. And if they're not effective, then it's also hard to continue them into the future. So I think part of the portfolio I manage now is analysis. So we fund analysis looking at like how low does the cost of a technology have to be for wide scale market adoption? Is there a realistic path to getting to that cost projection? Where in the country could a deployment make the biggest impact? And then one thing that there's a lot of interest in now is modeling how the grid could evolve into the future and kind of how to facilitate greening of the grid. So how do we mitigate transmission constraints? What role will carbon capture and sequestration play in the future? How much can you really do CCS just based on geographic limitations? Like what's advancing? Is it realistic to advance direct air capture technologies, or should we just assume that a certain fraction of our carbon emissions won't be able to be addressed that way and then plan to displace fossil fuels to a greater extent? So I think there's a whole field of analysis just trying to answer questions like that, like what could the future look like, and what does the cost of technology need to be for a particular goal to be realized? And I think that's really important. Separate from that, I would say that in the RD&D space, R&D to lower the cost and improve the efficiency of manufacturing at scale. So particularly with all this interest in deployments. So as an example, one of the things that we're now focusing on in our office is manufacturing hydrogen production technologies that are clean, like electrolyzers at like the gigawatt scale, which is like orders of magnitude beyond what we had done before. So to make it cheaper to manufacture, but not too energy intensive, I think that's going to be a critical place.
That's great. And do you see, is there a type of job when it comes to decarbonization? Do you see a career path 10 years from now that maybe don't exist now? We talk frequently about jobs of the future not existing today. Do you see something promising in that arena that might exist 10 years from now for someone planning their career?
I think direct air capture of carbon is something that is a little bit of a black box today. I think that's oftentimes when people try to model how to get to net zero carbon emissions by 2050, they kind of assume there's going to have to be a role for direct air capture, but is the technology really going to be ready, or is it just always going to be 15 years out? Is I think a big question. So I think that could end up being a priority 10 years from now, as some of the more like things that are pilot scale today become commercially viable. And I think also, like I said, manufacturing, like there are certain types of manufacturing technologies that are just now being developed. People that can like operate those and optimize efficiency, like systems engineers and industrial engineers that specifically focus on manufacturing. I think that'll be another space that isn't as big today, but would be probably bigger 10 years from now.
Great. Thank you so much. Mariana, for you, as it relates to the emerging technologies piece, like communities facing poverty they're more often impacted by legacy infrastructures in all sectors, not just power, right? But how do we ensure equitable access to renewable energy and clean energy technologies to communities that may be economically challenged or maybe not have had that access before?
Absolutely. And the first answer and the first step is actually sounds simple, right? And it's talking to them. It's reaching out to them and building bridges and relationships with them to understand where their priorities lie and which technologies would improve their lives better. I think listening is the first step, and really creating, a robust stakeholder engagement process and a system in which you can continuously get their feedback and get their input as you move forward, right, to improve or transition a community, a town, a city to clean energy. That's definitely number one. And then number two, I would circle back to that item I mentioned in my first question, which is ownership. Really pushing for solutions like community solar, where more than just one entity can benefit from a renewable energy project.
So as follow up to that, so solar is a great example, right? Wind maybe less so, but solar that requires distributed, like solar collection panels, maybe even distributed energy storage. So that's like an all-in prospect for communities, and whether that's communities that are impoverished or whether communities that are economically a little bit more secure. So what's the from the national perspective of rolling out and engaging communities, right? What is what are the sort of the secret sauce to making sure that we're not only engaging these communities properly, but having them feel the impact of it early rather than asking them to wait a decade while people at the front of the line feel it first. Like what can we do to make that impact felt in these communities of poverty?
Absolutely. We need to make them the priority and the object of these projects, right? When we're talking about decarbonizing the commercial space, for example, we think about, the really big polluters, those really big companies, but we can't leave behind, for example, small to medium buildings. We can't leave behind schools and nursing homes that when you improve those properties, the benefits of those improvements flow directly to the communities that occupy those buildings. Those buildings are important as well, right? And maybe decarbonizing a portfolio of a couple hundred warehouses that belong to a big company has a huge impact. But really engaging a really solid group of small and medium buildings, mom and pop shops, schools can have even greater impacts, right? Because we know that when we improve energy efficiency and when we improve building technologies, that has a direct impact, oftentimes on occupant health, right? The people that are in that building becomes a healthier building. So not only are we going green, but we are keeping the communities that occupy those buildings safe. So we need to make them the objective of those projects, because we need to realize and internalize that there is a strategic value in doing that as well. Does that answer your question?
It does. It does. I mean, I think it's a pernicious problem, obviously, right? But the community engagement piece, right, making sure that there's small incremental impacts, I think, is absolutely. If you were to map other technologies, you have these small deployments in communities that I think are incredibly effective. So I think that's very insightful. Thank you. From Melissa, what could I ask you about cybersecurity systems for a second? We talk about that frequently. We're obviously looking at the world today, and whether it's an airline system or something, the resilience of our system to be able to continuously operate are one of the absolutely vital things to have a stable community. So, could you talk about the measures that should be taken to secure cyber physical systems are resilient and to the environmental and cybersecurity threats? I'm going to include the environmental threats for just unplanned disruptions in addition to malicious acts as well. So could you talk about really what do we need to do nationally to make sure that this is a resilient, secure, and reliable energy grid going forward?
Yeah, cybersecurity is a very rapidly evolving field, right? And just like resilience, I don't think one size fits all. So it's a combination of tools, it's a combination of methods and processes. Um, I think what we're seeing right now is the proliferation of these systems. And inverter-based resources are digital systems. They have connectivities. They have in some cases, they have access to the internet. They have, there's a diversity of stakeholders and manufacturers. So, for example, what my office is doing is to looking at a standards, what standards can be implemented for smaller scale systems. We have some other entities like NERC that work with large scale plant level systems,
Could
and
you
they have
explain what that is,
an
NERC?
implement.
Could you explain what that is for the audience?
Yeah, it's I'm very bad with acronyms, so I might have to look it up real quick, and I apologize for that. North American Electric Reliability Corporation, and they make sure that our grid, North American grid, is secure from the bulk power system level, which is like not the distribution but the generation and transmission. So they have a set of methods, right, to keep some of these systems secure. But when you go down to the distribution level, rooftop level, right, the systems that are in a house or small scale systems that are in a community, then we run into some of the perhaps some security challenges because there may not be a good standard that people can follow to secure these systems. There is now a conversation on how do we secure the systems, who owns the risk, who is responsible if something happens. So this is evolving right now, and there's many efforts from the different stakeholders that are super committed to secure these systems. And so this is a very evolving field, and I encourage people to take a look at, if you like computers, if you like digital systems, you understand that, to take a look at getting a cybersecurity general, I think, certification. If you can, I think it's easy to do now with the different free courses online. And this is something that we need. It's a workforce, right? And in this particular space, there's much to do there, and we don't have many experts on cyber for the grid, specifically for clean energy technology. There's a lot of different work that is being going on with the National Renewable Energy Lab and so many other organizations. What do we need to do? Well, we need to work together, right, and make sure that we secure our passwords at home, and that we make sure we don't share those with anyone. We just, just simple steps like that also work. And it will, it will evolve to a point where we'll sort things out, and we will have we are developing standards right now from our office. We're working on a program that has different efforts, and one of the things we're doing is the standards. Another thing is risk mitigation and analysis, health of your plant, right? What kind of processes are you following, the stakeholders are following to keep their systems secure? So there's a lot of efforts going on also on supply chain. How can we secure the manufacturing? There's programs that are dedicated into looking at that, engaging with vendors, doing certification for inverter-based resources. So there's a lot of different activities going on. But it's not enough, right? That we have a landscape today with certain level of penetration of these systems, and it's going to evolve. In 10 years, it's going to look different. So we're going to need new tools. So we need people in the audience to get interested and read about this and reach out. I think something very important is to reach out if you're interested, and we'll send you material for you to read. And so, yeah, I mean, it's very interesting to me. It's very interesting because it continues to evolve, and I like the technical challenge. And I can see how, you integrate multiple technologies, multiple STEM fields. You engage the power electronic guys with a communication and IT person, information technology person, sensors, looking at the physical system, also looking at the network and network management. So then everything gets integrated together into different tools. So those are it's very interesting. So I encourage people to take a look at that.
Yeah, and if I understand it correctly, DOE offers some internships specifically around cybersecurity. So you don't have to just do cybersecurity in general. You can get involved in a sector like energy through DOE.
Correct. Yes, and the different labs, like we mentioned before, will have also internships open for the summer students. And I encourage people to take a look at the pages for the labs. I think some of the information from the researchers is publicly available, and the only takes a short email to say, hey, I'm interested in learning more. I'm interested in working with you. And typically people respond and say, hey, yeah, great. This is what you need to do. I mean, it's just
Great.
that simple.
Great. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. Neha, back on the idea of sort of the skills and the knowledge you need when it comes to hydrogen fuel cells. Again, this is a great diversity of different energy technologies here. I've heard you talk just the implications of what you said. I've heard chemistry, I've heard material science, I've heard mechanical engineering for systems, heat dissipation, so thermal engineering. That might extend if we got that into the auto fleet to mechanics or waste disposal. So could you talk about the unique skills and knowledge professionals should have to be successful if they're working in the broad sector of hydrogen fuel cells now and in the next 10 years?
Yeah, maybe I'll describe it in the context of how our office is structured. So within our office, we have a few different teams. So we have a core team of a team of teams that fund the more foundational R&D work. So we have a production team, so they fund work on how you make hydrogen from water today. So the main technology today is electrolysis. And so right now their focus is on how do you scale up electrolysis and get it to be low cost at scale. They also fund work on some of the really low technology readiness type technologies, things that are really at a lab scale today and at least 15 years away from commercialization. And basically just bringing those to function is really the goal. So there's that suite of work. There's R&D just on production. And there, I would say the biggest skill is electrochemistry. So like folks that have a background in chemistry in college or material science, I would say those would be the two probably most attractive or most directly relevant to that team. Then we have the infrastructure team. So the infrastructure team funds research to lower the cost of moving hydrogen. So hydrogen pipelines, hydrogen liquefaction, hydrogen fueling stations. There, I would say a mechanical engineering background is most relevant because mechanical engineering is comparatively broad. It's more, like around how do you integrate components and like how do you keep things from failing? How do you know when something's failing? Infrastructure is generally largely about reliability. So that's the space that I would say is most relevant. Then we also have a fuel cell team. So fuel cells are the units that are analogous to batteries. In a fuel cell, you have hydrogen on one side and oxygen from the air on the other. The two combine to make water. And in the process of making water, they also generate electricity. And you can use that electricity to power a car or a building or any other source. So we have a fuel cell team that funds research on lowering the cost of fuel cells and now also on recycling fuel cells. And their background is very similar to production, is largely in electrochemistry and material science. So I started out in the infrastructure team because of my background in hydrogen pipelines, which was sort of mechanical engineering / material science. Now the team that I manage is completely separate, and that's the analysis and codes and standards. So on the analysis side, really the background is more policy related. So the people that we fund, in college, they could have done really anything. Usually it's in grad school that they specialized in some sort of policy related field. So in college, they may have studied mechanical engineering. They may have done a completely non-engineering degree. And then usually in grad school, they focused on something. So they focused on studying how the grid works, or they focused on studying how renewable energy certificates work. What are the downsides of structuring them in one way or the other? How do you do a cost of ownership analysis? Like how do you evaluate, even we have like MBAs, for example, at the labs who just do financial analysis. How do you do emissions analysis? How far up should you go when you're looking at the emissions impact of a particular technology? What are the standard ways of doing that? So that's more of those backgrounds are typically honed in grad school, and they're typically more so defined by what somebody like specific degree that they got in a policy related realm. So I honestly mean it when I say it's very, very broad. I think with any focus, you can end up, having a career path. It's more just about picking something that you like and being good at that, because I think that opportunities really are quite broad within that space.
That's great. Thank you so much. Mariana, I'll congratulate you before I mixed up some of my questions. I asked you one of Marissa's questions and you rolled with it. So I want to say thank you for being flexible. On your end, though, I'm thinking of this from an aspect of, I think we tend to think of policy as driven entirely by governments, but I know that with the rise of, let's say, a B Corp, which for the audience, there's this thing called the B Corp, which is not quite a nonprofit, but not quite a for-profit. It's really a socially responsible for-profit entity that deals with public good. So could you talk about the pathways if students are interested in shaping public policy, and how can they take different pathways into this as a career, both from the commercial side, whether that's B Corp or commercial side entirely, or from the federal end? Like, what's their pathway? Is there a trade craft involved here? Is it all academic? Is it all internship? Like, what's their pathway forward for a career in public-private partnerships around energy?
I was muted. So first, I'll start off by saying, pursuing trade schools is a more than viable pathway. It's a valuable pathway. We need contractors, we need installers, we need electricians, we need folks that work in HVAC, etc. Those we have it. That workforce is an aging workforce, and they refer to the gray wave, which is kind of a retirement wave, right? A lot of our electricians, a lot of our HVAC specialists are going to be retiring soon, so those jobs are going to be in high demand. And not only are they in high demand, they're the climate solutions that we have on hand right now. We don't need more research and development to switch out a light bulb or to, improve HVAC operations in a building, which, by the way, also keep people safe because they ventilate dirty air out of the building and bring fresh air inside and reduce the spread of airborne pathogens. So trade schools, an obvious pathway. And then what I would say is, if you're interested in pursuing an engineering degree, or you're really passionate about healthcare, or you're really passionate about education in schools, or you're really into cinema, for example, really to throw out an option, right? There are spaces for sustainability professionals, for engineers in those worlds, right? There are energy managers that deal with the operations of a large healthcare system and a hospital portfolio, for example. So if you're really interested in a specific space, right, and want to work in a specific type of building or environment, but you also want to be an engineer and you don't know how to salvage the two, you can work in a healthcare environment and be an engineer. And there are a lot of different examples of how those synergies kind of like exist out there in the industry. I just keep pulling out healthcare because I work with hospitals. So that's that's the best example I can think of right now.
Right. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. And from Marissa, I'd love to sort of get the affordability of this technology. That's at the top of my mind, both for businesses and homes and individuals. So could you talk a little bit about, again, this I guess is about taking the research technologies and make them practical, right? So what strategies can be employed to ensure that clean energy technologies are affordable and available to all communities, that they have the best options that they have available to them? Can you talk about what strategies you think are key for the next, I don't know, 5 to 10 years, whether that be subsidies or whether that be, industry bringing the cost down, or whether it's investments in local manufacturing? Like, what do you think are the most important strategies that we need to employ?
So that's a great question, and I'm not a policy person. I'm more of a technical side, but I could say that if you take the example of solar, right, and how rapidly it's getting adopted, well, that then bring down the cost, right? So what's the demand for the specific technology? Now, one thing that we need to work on, and I think it's just, it's probably, the subsidizing of the technologies will help. Tax breaks will help for low and moderate income communities as well, right? Because we want to be equitable with the deployment of these technologies. We want everybody to benefit from advanced technologies, from a secure and clean energy system, not only just some portions, right? So in order to do that, I think some of the ideas that have been going on right now in terms of tax breaks, in terms of subsidizing technology, and engaging the community in technical projects, so we understand what their needs are, what the status of their infrastructure, and then work that angle as well, will also help to get the adoption and understand the needs to develop technologies that will cater to their needs, right? And being able to then, because in some cases we have great technology, but then the infrastructure is not ready to take it. And then how do you bridge that gap? And the only way of doing it is to get more of the community engagement part, just like Mariana was talking about, to get more awareness of what is it that is needed, right? How do you incentivize industry to go and get a new build a new substation to support a specific project, or get better infrastructure to support installation of batteries or solar panels or other type of technologies that can help bring down the cost of electricity to support these communities. So it's a combination of things. And I just give you some of my ideas. Probably some of my colleagues are better suited to answer the question, but this is the things that comes to my head.
Well, that's great. Thank you. And the mention of equity, I think, is a great way to sort of wrap up this hour. I'll go over to each one of you. Equity, energy, transportation, or sort of fundamental services like that, they cross all communities equally, right? Especially energy. Every citizen of the world has almost an equal stake in reliable energy, in available energy, in clean energy, and in cheap energy. So what do you think? I'll start with Neha and go around the circle here. But what do you think of the? What is one key thing that can happen to bring more voices into the energy sector? Let's say on the chemistry end or the hydrogen fuel cell end. We'll start with you, Neha. What's something? Is it better internships? Is it better outreach from the Department of Energy? Is it better industry outreach? What's the thing we can do to bring more voices into energy technologies?
That's a good question. I think it's sort of sometimes these things get conflated because there's one issue of like getting more people into STEM, but then like on the topic of like equity within energy, I think that's broader. And I guess just generally speaking, kind of piggybacking on what Marissa was saying, being really intentional about how we do that. I think sometimes we're like racing to do that as fast as we can, but the same solution isn't going to make sense in every context. So because every technology affects people differently. So solar energy affects people's electricity bill. Hydrogen, most people don't even know what it is. Like the impact could be very different depending on what the technology is. So just looking really specifically at like, is the impact jobs? Is it electricity price? Is it resource consumption? Is it optics? Is it something different? And then really addressing that maybe distinctly for each category would be so being really intentional about kind of how we do outreach and engaging like the right people that are actually affected on every topic space.
Intentional outreach. I like that. And to you, Mariana, same kind of question. What's one key thing that you think we could do to bring more people into the conversation, whether that's the working end, the education end, or the consumer end?
So I think really engaging community-based organizations that do the organizing and engage with the communities is also a really great partner and entity that needs to be brought into the fold of the projects that are started up either at the state or local government level or the federal level more enhanced. I think that is a really great way to start. On the research and development front, we work with a lot of higher education institutions, and it's almost like comfortable to reach out to the entities that we usually work with. Think about the MITs of the world. But there's a lot of talent and there's a lot of expertise on what communities need in minority serving institutions. So think about tribal colleges and universities, think about historically Black colleges, Hispanic serving institutions. Those are the types of entities that DOE, for example, when they're thinking about their research and development of new technologies, need to be tapping that talent and need to be listening to what those scholars and experts think is important. And that's what we call, right, the research, development, and deployment pipeline. So how do we bring communities, how do we bring diversity into that pipeline? Not when we're ready to deploy the technology, not when it's market ready, but from the beginning. And that takes me back to my main point of talking to people and what technologies are important to them and what would impact their lives the most. So I'll add that piece.
That's great. And for Melissa, what could, if you could talk, especially coming from Oak Ridge, like it's a gem really in the national, in the crown of our nation in terms of energy research and development. I don't know how much of it is in the public mind, and even the Tennessee Valley Authority, right, in terms of like its power
Yeah.
generation history. What can we do to engage more people in these sort of advanced research and sort of increase the number of voices and the pathways in to these advanced research and development initiatives?
Yeah, I will just emphasize being intentional.
Mm,
You need to make sure that you get out of your way to reach out to groups that traditionally don't get engaged into these initiatives, that they don't get the information. And Mariana mentioned some of the, organizations. Uh, I think it's a collective job. I think activities like this are doing the job to reach out to some of the students who will go back to their houses and will talk about this, right, to their parents, there's the cascading effect there, right? I can. I'm very passionate about this because I can think back and look back and say, well, nobody came and talked to me about any of these things. So I kind of was
mm,
very proactive and into finding information. So I think for us, this is our duty, right? To be intentional and to actually in every part of our job to make sure that we're reaching as much people as we can. Because as I mentioned before, you can develop the best technology ever, but if nobody has a good use for it, then it's pointless.
that's right.
And if we want to achieve the level of equity that we want to achieve, we need to engage with communities, community-based organizations. Tell me what you need, what are your challenges, and then build technology around that. It's a different mindset a little bit if you think about it, but I think from my perspective and from my experience at EERE, we're moving towards that direction. Like I
Mm,
can see how we are making an effort to include the community voices into the program development, into the next round of projects, and making sure that we get the technical people with the community people and they get together and be a facilitator in this communication, because sometimes that could be a bit of an awkward to say somewhere, like, right, they just don't speak the same language. But
yeah.
so I think DOE is taking a leadership role into getting that accomplished from my point of view.
Great. Thank you. I want to thank all of our panelists for being here today. This is really an interesting discussion. I know the future of energy is tied to the future success of our entire country and really the world. So I hope everyone will consider a career in that. We'll post some of the resources for internships that I know you've mentioned here. And I want to point out and thank the Department of Energy for sponsoring one of our first robotics competition events in Alexandria, Virginia. If you are available to attend, anybody listening, I hope you'll come to that event. There'll be some great displays, some more opportunities and information about internships there. And we might even have a demo or two, or maybe some hydrogen fuel cell cars or something else like that. So I think it's going to be a really exciting event. So I want to thank the Department of Energy for their strong support to advancing the careers of all of our burgeoning STEM leaders that are coming out of our programs. Thank you profusely. Thank you for joining me today, and thank you for your insight. So thank you. Everyone have a great day, a great night. Thank you again.